The woman in seat 9C had boarded the early morning flight with quiet steps, the same way she had boarded every flight for the last 12 years. She carried a small gray backpack, nothing special, nothing that made anyone look at her twice. Her face was calm, her eyes steady, and she kept to herself. She always did. Most passengers barely noticed her. To them, she was just another traveler who preferred silence over conversation. And that was exactly how she liked it. The cabin was still filling when she sat down, fastening her seatbelt without looking around. The window beside her showed a rising sun touching the ground with soft orange light. It was peaceful, and she let herself breathe slowly, the way she had been trained long ago. Fewer people knew that habit now. In fact, no one on this flight knew anything real about her. Not the crew, not the passengers, not even the flight attendants who passed her. A polite smile. She avoided attention on purpose. For more than a decade, she had lived a life that looked simple from the outside. A small apartment, a quiet job, a routine that never changed. It was easier to stay invisible that way. Easier to forget who she had been. And safer too. Some things from the past were better left behind, hidden from the world, hidden even from herself. She closed her eyes for a moment, listening to the soft hum of passengers settling in. A child across the aisle was asking questions about clouds. A man in front of her was struggling with his seatbelt. Everything felt ordinary, almost boring, and ordinary was good. Ordinary meant no one looked twice at the woman who had once flown. Faster, higher, and closer to danger than most people on Earth would ever imagine. The captain's voice came through the speakers, warm and steady. He explained the flight time, the weather, the cruising altitude. The passengers listened half-heartedly, some already scrolling through their phones or adjusting their seats. The woman listened too, but not as a normal passenger. Her mind still worked with the instinct she had learned years ago. She noticed the tone of his voice, the confidence, the rhythm. She noticed how the first officer spoke as well. Small things that most people ignored were still sharp in her mind. She pushed the thoughts aside, that life was over. She reminded herself again, as she did every day, that she was not that person anymore. She was not Viper. She was not the fighter ace whose name once echoed in radio rooms. She was just a quiet traveler who wanted peace, not attention. The aircraft rolled back from the gate, and she felt the familiar push against her back. Takeoff. She kept her breathing steady as the plane accelerated down the runway. It lifted smoothly into the sky, and for a moment her heart tightened. Flying always did that to her. It stirred memories she tried so hard to forget, long nights in a cockpit. Sudden alarms, sharp turns above the clouds, and voices calling her call sign with urgency. She forced her eyes open and focused on the cabin. She was a passenger now. Nothing more. The flight leveled off. The seatbelt signs turned off. People relaxed. The attendant offered her a drink, and she politely refused. She never took anything on flights. Old habits. The attendants didn't think much of it. They had seen all kinds of preferences. She leaned back, looking out at the smooth blanket of white clouds. Everything seemed normal until she heard something. It was faint, but not a sound she could ever ignore. A slight shift in tone from the cockpit speakers, like someone pressing a button with shaky fingers. She sat up straighter without meaning to. Seconds later, the cabin speakers crackled again, but this time the voice was different. It was not steady. It was strained, almost breathless. The passengers around her did not notice at first, but she did. She could tell something was wrong even before the captain tried speaking again. Then the announcement came, but halfway through, the voice broke off completely. A nervous silence fell over the cabin. The attendants exchanged frightened looks. The passengers looked around, confused. The woman in 9C felt her heartbeat change. Not fast, but focused, controlled. She knew that kind of silence. She knew what it meant when a pilot's voice suddenly stopped mid-sentence. A moment later, an attendant rushed toward the cockpit. Another followed, whispering into the phone at the jump seat. The tension spread through the cabin. A few passengers asked what was happening, but the attendants avoided direct answers. They were clearly worried that the woman stayed still. She watched everything without drawing attention to herself. She saw the door open slightly, just enough for her to understand the truth the attendants were trying to hide. The captain was unconscious. The first officer sounded stressed. They needed help. People around her kept whispering. Some were scared. Some were confused. No one knew what to do. But in her mind, something old and familiar had already awakened that something. She thought she had buried forever. And far above them, in the cold sky, 2 F-22s on patrol would soon hear a call that would make them freeze in place, because the world had forgotten her call sign, but the sky had not, and neither had they. The cabin tension grew heavier with every passing second. The woman in 9C could feel it like a slow tightening net around the passengers. People sensed something was wrong, even if they didn't know the details. The attendants were doing everything they could to keep the plane calm, but their voices carried a tone they could not hide. Fear always leaked through the smallest cracks. The first officer tried to make an announcement, but his voice shook the moment he spoke. He said they were handling a situation. He said everything was under control. But even a child could hear the uncertainty in his words. The woman in 9C sat completely still, listening to every tiny sound coming from the cockpit. She could picture the scene exactly. The first officer alone at the controls. The captain slumped over, the alarms softly blinking, the pressure rising with every minute. She knew how quickly a normal flight could turn into a desperate one. And she also knew that she couldn't just sit there forever. Yet she hesitated. For 12 years she had trained herself to stay invisible, to never step into a cockpit again, to leave the sky behind. She had promised herself she would never return to that world. She had built a quiet life to escape the weight of her past. But now, as she watched the fear building in the cabin, she felt a familiar pull inside her, a duty she had once followed. Without question, an attendant hurried down the aisle again. This time her eyes were red, as if she had just fought off panic. She reached row 9 and paused briefly, trying to keep her breath steady. The woman watched her closely. "Is everything okay?" a passenger asked softly. The attendant forced a smile. "We're working on it. Please stay seated." The smile faded the moment she turned away. The woman in 9C knew exactly what that meant. Things were getting worse. The plane made a slight tilt to the left, sharper than a standard banking angle. Most passengers didn't recognize it, but her body reacted instantly. It wasn't a planned turn. It was the kind of movement a pilot made when overwhelmed, trying to control too many things at once. She took a slow breath. Her fingers gently pressed her armrest, feeling the vibration of the engines. Her instincts were waking up fully now. They were louder, clearer, and harder to shut down. Finally, the attendant returned, moving faster this time, and she approached a few passengers who looked physically strong. "Do any of you have medical training?" she asked in a controlled whisper. Most shook their heads. "What's happening?" someone demanded. The attendant looked around nervously, then said something she had been trying to avoid. "The captain is unresponsive. The first officer is doing his best, but we need help." The cabin erupted in whispers. Some gasped, some covered their mouths. Others simply froze. The woman in 9C felt a sudden wave of pressure behind her ribs. She had tried to run from her past, but her past had followed her. It was sitting right here in this cabin with her, wrapped in fear and hope. She knew she couldn't pretend any longer. Still, she didn't jump up like a hero in a movie. She just sat there for a moment longer, staring at her hands. They were steady. They had always been steady. Even in moments when the sky itself seemed to break apart around her, Her hands never shook. They were trained for this. A soft voice broke her thoughts. "Miss, are you okay?" It was a teenage boy sitting across the aisle. He didn't know anything about her, but he saw the focus in her eyes. She blinked and nodded gently. "I'm fine," she said, but she wasn't fine, not with staying silent anymore. The plane jolted again. This time passengers gasped loudly. The first officer was struggling. The woman unclipped her seatbelt quietly and stood up. She didn't move with drama or noise. She moved with calm purpose. Even the people closest to her instantly felt that she wasn't rising out of panic. There was something different about her, something controlled, trained. The attendant saw her and hurried forward. "Ma'am, please stay seated," she said in a trembling voice. The woman spoke softly, her tone firm but not harsh. "You need help in the cockpit." The attendant froze. She looked into the woman's eyes and instinctively understood this wasn't a random guess. It was confidence. It was experience. "Are you a doctor?" The attendant whispered, "No." The woman said, "But I can help your first officer." The attendant hesitated. She wasn't allowed to let passengers near the cockpit. It was against protocol. But the fear in her eyes showed she was running out of options. "Please," the woman said calmly. "Every second matters." There was something about her voice, steady, quiet, certain, that made the attendant step aside. She nodded and guided her toward the front. Passengers watched her walk up the aisle. No one knew who she was. No one knew what she could do. They just felt the air shift around her, like someone had finally stood up who wasn't afraid. When she reached the cockpit door, the attendant pressed the security code. The door opened just enough for the woman to see the first officer fighting. The controls, sweat on his forehead, alarms flashing lightly around him. The moment he turned and saw her, confusion crossed his face. "Who are you?" he asked, breathless. She stepped inside slowly and closed the door behind her. She didn't answer him yet, because in less than 10 minutes, the radios in the sky would carry a name he would never expect to hear, a name he thought belonged to history. Named the F-22s still remembered, Viper. The cockpit felt different the moment she stepped inside. It wasn't loud or chaotic, but there was a quiet panic in the air, the kind that only trained pilots could sense. The first officer sat rigid in the left seat, both hands gripping the controls as if they were slipping away from him. His breathing was uneven, and he kept glancing at the captain slumped beside him, hoping the man would wake up. But he didn't. The woman closed the door gently behind her, her movements controlled and unhurried. She looked around the cockpit with eyes that seemed to remember every screen, every switch, every sound. It had been 12 years, but nothing inside a flight deck ever truly left her mind. The first officer stared at her, confused and frustrated. "Ma'am, please go back to your seat. I can't have passengers in here right now." She didn't react to his tone. She walked closer, her voice steady. "Your left engine is slightly overcompensating. Trim it before it works against you." He blinked. "How do you?" But before he finished, another soft warning tone rang through the cockpit. His hands fumbled to silence it. He looked overwhelmed. Even someone without aviation knowledge could see that 3 things were happening at once, and he was trying to manage all of them alone. The woman didn't ask permission. She simply moved toward the auxiliary panel and adjusted a setting he had missed. The warning tone faded out. The first officer stared at her in shock. Who are you?" he whispered. "I'm someone who can help you land this airplane," she answered. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't show stress. She stood calmly beside him, her presence strangely grounding. For the first time since the captain collapsed, he felt he wasn't alone. He swallowed hard and confessed something he didn't want to say. "I've never handled a situation like this." "Not alone. I'm trying, but I know," she said softly. "You're doing well. But you can't fly and troubleshoot at the same time. let me help." Her voice had the quiet authority of someone who had once given orders in a place far above the clouds. She pulled the co-pilot headset toward her hands, but before putting it on, she asked, "Have you declared an emergency?" The first officer looked embarrassed. "No, I was trying not to scare the passengers." She took a slow breath. "You need to declare it, now." He hesitated only a moment before nodding and opening the radio channel. His voice shook as he began the emergency call. He barely got out the first few words before another problem revealed itself. Static interference, a weak signal. They were heading into an area with patchy communication. The first officer hit the panel lightly in frustration. "I can't lose radio now." "Not now." The woman gently set her hand near the radio. "Controls," brushing her fingers across the dials, the way a musician touched a familiar instrument. She made 3 small adjustments, none of them dramatic. Just the kind of precise corrections only someone deeply trained would know. The static softened. Immediately, the first officer stared. "How did you keep talking?" she said simply. He did, and for the first time, the emergency call made it through clearly. As he spoke, she slid into the right seat. She didn't ask. She didn't need to. The seat seemed to recognize her. Her posture changed, becoming sharper and more alert. Her hands hovered just above the controls, not touching yet, but ready. She looked at the unconscious captain. Her eyes held a mixture of calm and something deeper, memories, maybe pain, maybe acceptance. Then she focused forward again. Once the first officer ended his call, he turned to her. "This is unreal. You fly?" For the first time, she hesitated. That hesitation carried 12 years of silence. "I used to," she said quietly. "How much experience?" He asked, almost hopeful. She looked straight ahead as she answered, "Enough to get us out of this." She didn't say more, and he didn't press her. Somehow he sensed that her past was not something people asked about, but he trusted her instantly. He had no reason to, yet every instinct in him said she was the only chance they had. A new alert blinked on the screen. Weather ahead. Slight turbulence building. The first officer sighed heavily. "Great. More trouble." "It's manageable," she said. "Stay calm and follow my lead." Her tone wasn't commanding. It was steady, reassuring, confident. The kind of confidence that comes only from thousands of hours in the sky. She placed her right hand lightly on the throttle, her left near the controls. She didn't take over. She simply guided his movements, subtle corrections, tiny adjustments. The plane steadied almost instantly. The difference was so clear the first officer whispered, "How are you doing this?" "I've seen worse skies," she replied. Down in the cabin, passengers felt the shift too. The plane wasn't jerking anymore. The tension softened a little. People began whispering less. Some felt hope without knowing why. Back in the cockpit, the woman put on the spare headset. The radio crackled softly on standby. She knew the next part was coming. If Air Command picked up their emergency call, if the situation was flagged at the right time, if patrol jets were nearby, then the sky would soon be listening. And when they heard her voice, her real voice, they wouldn't ask who she was. They would already know. Her call sign had once carried weight across miles of open sky. And the F-22 pilots had never forgotten it. Viper. Asterisk. The woman kept her eyes on the horizon, watching how the light shifted on the clouds ahead. She could feel the aircraft's weight, its balance, its small hidden struggles. Even after so many years away from a cockpit, the sensations returned to her like muscle memory waking up from sleep. The first officer watched her hands closely. They moved with a calm precision he had only seen in senior pilots, the kind who had lived through storms, emergencies, and long nights that tested every nerve. He finally asked the question that had been burning in his mind. "Why did you stop flying?" She didn't answer at first. Her expression stayed neutral, but something in her eyes flickered, a shadow from the past. Life changes, she said softly. And sometimes you choose quiet over the sky. The first officer sensed the weight behind her words and didn't push further. The radio crackled faintly, pulling her attention. The emergency call had reached air traffic control, but the signal was unstable. She adjusted the frequency again, trying to improve it. A static-filled voice broke through. Flight, confirm, captain condition? The first officer leaned in to respond, but she placed a gentle hand on his arm. Let me, she said. He nodded without hesitation. She pressed the radio switch, her voice steady. This is the co-pilot speaking. Captain is unconscious. First officer is handling controls. We require priority routing. She paused, waiting. For the reply, the radio hissed, then cleared slightly. Copy, stand by, rerouting. But before the controller could finish, the signal fractured completely. The radio went silent again, leaving them with nothing but the hum of the engines. The first officer shook his head. We're losing communication again. This entire sector is a mess. She didn't panic. Instead, she scanned the cockpit screens and then looked out the window at a specific angle. Something in her gaze sharpened, as if she noticed something others would miss. We're close to a patrol corridor, she said quietly. The first officer blinked. How do you know that? She hesitated only a second. Old instincts. He accepted her answer even though it made no sense to him. Something about her voice made him trust her far more than logic told him to. The flight hit light turbulence. Passengers murmured nervously. Down in the cabin, an attendant tried to calm them, but the unease still lingered. People sensed the tension of the unseen. Back in the cockpit, the woman studied the radar. Although commercial aircraft didn't display military patrols, she knew the patterns. She felt the altitude, the heading, the angle of the sun, and a specific drop in radio noise that only happened in certain zones. Then, barely noticeable, a faint echo appeared on the traffic screen. Not a full target, just a soft flicker. A shadow more than a trace, but she knew that echo well. She leaned forward. We may have company soon, the first officer misunderstood. Another aircraft? That's good, maybe they can help relay messages. She didn't correct him. Instead, she looked straight ahead as if waiting for something inevitable. Another few minutes passed. The turbulence softened. The passengers felt calmer again, even though nothing was truly calm. Suddenly the radio crackled, a different kind of transmission this time. Sharper, cleaner, but still distant. Unidentified commercial flight. Respond. The first officer's eyes widened. That's not civilian air traffic control. She already knew that. She pressed the radio button slowly. Responding. State your identification. The voice returned, still cautious. This is Falcon Lead. We picked up a fragmented distress signal. Confirm your situation. The first officer shot her a look of shock. Fighter patrols rarely contacted commercial flights directly. Something about their tone felt tense. He whispered, "Why are F-22s talking to us?" She didn't answer. Instead, she pressed the switch again. We have a pilot unconscious. Flight control is compromised but manageable. We need assistance with communication. A long silence followed. In a cockpit, silence could be louder. Then alarms. Then the voice came again, this time sharper, more focused. Identify yourself, co-pilot. The first officer glanced at her. Just tell them your name. It's protocol. But she stayed quiet. Falcon Lead spoke again, firmer than before. Commercial aircraft. Identify your right seat operator immediately. The first officer whispered. Nervously, they're serious. She finally exhaled, steady and slow. They know my voice, they're confirming. The first officer froze. What does that mean? She lowered her head slightly, as if accepting something she had been avoiding for years. Then she pressed the radio button, but instead of giving a name, She used a tone-controlled, exact, unmistakable. "This is assisting flight crew. I require secure frequency relay." 3 seconds passed. Then the radio erupted, not loudly, but with a sudden shift in energy. "Viper? Viper? Is that you?" The first officer's mouth dropped open. He stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. The woman didn't move. She didn't smile. She didn't react at all. She simply spoke into the radio with the calm authority she once carried across an entire sky. "Falcon lead, maintain your distance. We're stabilizing the aircraft." The radio fell silent only for a moment. Then the voice returned, this time filled with a mixture of disbelief, respect, and something like awe. "Viper, we're at your command." The first officer whispered, breathless, "You're Viper?" Her eyes stayed forward, fixed on the horizon. "I was," she said. Softly, "a long time ago." Asterisk, the first officer sat frozen, staring at the woman beside him as if the entire world had shifted in one breath. Just a short while ago, she had been a silent passenger in seat 9C. Now 2 F-22 pilots in the sky were addressing her with a call sign. They spoke with respect, disbelief, and something close to fear. He tried to speak, but no words came out. Only. After a long moment did he manage a whisper. "You're the Viper?" "The one from—" She gently stopped him. "Focus on flying. We'll talk later." He swallowed hard and nodded. She wasn't being dramatic. She simply knew the aircraft came first. The radio crackled again, this time clearer. "Viper, Falcon lead on station. Say your needs." She closed her eyes briefly, letting the old instinct settle inside her. When she opened them, her focus was razor sharp. "Falcon lead, maintain parallel position. We need communication relay. Confirm emergency routing." "Copy, Viper, relaying now." Her voice carried a tone she hadn't used in years, calm, direct, absolute. The sky responded to it instantly. The first officer felt his breathing steady as she worked. It was like sitting beside someone who knew every answer before the question formed. He didn't know whether to feel relieved or overwhelmed. She scanned the displays again. "Altitude is drifting. Correct 2 degrees upward." He followed her instruction, and instantly the plane leveled more smoothly. She guided him through 3 more corrections, small movements but powerful. The tension in the aircraft loosened. Even passengers in the cabin felt the difference without knowing why. Conversations stopped, replaced by quiet hope. Down in the aisle, attendants whispered to each other. "The plane feels stable again." Maybe the first officer fixed something. No one imagined the truth. A former fighter ace was in the cockpit, flying once more after 12 silent years. The woman felt the engines hum through the floor pedals, a sensation she had tried to forget. It felt too familiar, too close to the life she had walked away from. She pushed the thought aside and focused on the now. Falcon lead spoke again. "Viper, we have emergency landing clearance for you. Airfield is preparing runway." She nodded instinctively, even though they couldn't see her. "Good. Keep us updated on weather cells ahead." "Understood. Tailwinds moderate. No storms on your path." The first officer let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. I can't believe this. You F-22s know you. They're treating you like a commander." "I'm not," she said quietly. "Not anymore, but you were." She didn't answer. Instead, she checked the captain again. His breathing was shallow but steady. She reached for the oxygen mask from the side compartment and secured it over his face with gentle hands. Her movements were precise, respectful. "You cared about your crew," the first officer said softly, noticing the tenderness in her actions. "All pilots care about their crew," she replied. "Or they should." He nodded, understanding a little more about her without her saying anything. Another alert tone blinked on the screen. "Fuel imbalance." Nothing dangerous yet, but it could become serious if ignored. Before he could even respond, she was already adjusting the crossfeed system. "You saw that faster than I did," he whispered. She didn't look up. "You've done well. You kept this aircraft steady long enough for help to arrive. Don't forget that." Her reassurance surprised him. It wasn't forced, it was genuine. Even with everything happening, she was guiding him with patience, not judgment. He felt his confidence slowly rebuilding. Outside the window, at a distance so perfect it looked choreographed, 2 F-22s finally came into view. Sleek shapes cutting through the sky with smooth precision. They weren't flying aggressively, they were escorting, protecting, supporting. "Falcon lead at your 9 o'clock, Viper," came the voice from the radio. "We're with you all the way." The first officer stared at the fighter jets in disbelief. "They're really here for you." "They're here for the aircraft," she corrected. But the slight crack in her voice hinted the truth. Some part of her never expected the sky to remember her. The turbulence hit again, minor, but enough to cause a few gasps in the cabin. The first officer adjusted instinctively, but the aircraft dipped more than expected. "Steady," she said gently. "Bring your right hand up a touch. Good, now hold it." He followed her instruction, and the aircraft stabilized again. "Thank you," he breathed. "Trust your training," she replied. "You know more than you think." For a moment, the cockpit grew quiet. Only the hum of the engines and the soft chatter from the fighter escort filled the air. The woman felt a heaviness building inside her, a question she had avoided for years. Why had she stopped flying? Why had she left everything behind? But there was no time for memories. The passengers depended on the next 20 minutes. The first officer depended on her calm. And the sky. The sky was listening again. Falcon lead came through once more. "Viper, emergency field reports strong crosswinds at low altitude. Recommend controlled descent under your command." The first officer looked at her, unsure. "Do you want to take over?" She didn't answer immediately. Her hands hovered over the controls, feeling the pulse of the aircraft like a heartbeat. She had promised herself never to fly again. But some promises break when lives depend on them. She placed both hands on the controls slowly. The movement filled with a quiet finality. "I'll fly," she said softly, and the sky seemed to hold its breath. The first officer watched her hands settle on the controls, and even though she moved slowly, the air in the cockpit changed instantly. It felt like the aircraft itself recognized her touch. The vibrations under their feet shifted, the nose steadied, and the drifting edges of turbulence softened as if the sky had suddenly remembered who was guiding the flight. She exhaled once, deep and quiet, not fear, not doubt. Something else, acceptance. 12 years of silence falling away in a single breath. "Taking control," she said softly. The first officer nodded, his eyes fixed on her every motion. "You have control." She eased the yoke slightly, aligning the aircraft with the vector that Falcon lead had relayed. The plane responded like it had been waiting for her. She adjusted the power with delicate precision, her movement smooth and measured, not one action wasted, not one moment of hesitation. Passengers in the cabin felt the difference immediately. The soft tremble that had worried them disappeared. The flight smoothed out as though guided by an invisible hand. Whispered. Conversation spread. "It feels better now." Something changed. Maybe the pilots fixed it. None of them knew that the woman who fixed it had once been responsible for maneuvers far more difficult than any airliner descent. Outside the window, one of the F-22s drifted closer, still keeping a respectful distance. Falcon lead spoke through the radio again, his tone more personal now. "Viper, your descent corridor is clear. Emergency field prepared. Winds shifting mildly to the west." She responded calmly. "Copy that. Adjusting course." The first officer studied her. "You fly like you never stopped." She kept her eyes forward. Some things stay in your hands even when they leave your life. He lowered his voice, careful not to break her focus. Why did you leave? Her jaw tightened. For a moment. She didn't answer. Then she said quietly, I made mistakes. I pushed too hard. And when the sky demands something from you, it doesn't let you leave without a price. He didn't know what that meant, but he could hear the truth in her tone, a past full of weight, a past she still carried. She guided the aircraft through the first stage of descent. The clouds thickened. Light turbulence brushed the wings. She made tiny corrections, soft taps, gentle shifts, countering every unseen ripple in the air. You read the wind like it's written on paper, the first officer said, amazed. I used to read it like a second language, she murmured. Today, it feels like an old friend who hasn't forgotten me. The radio crackled again. Viper, this is Falcon Lead. Command wants confirmation. Are you? The pilot hesitated, as if the words felt unreal. Are you really the same? Viper from the Northern Corridor operation? The first officer's breath caught, but she didn't flinch. Her voice stayed steady. I was there. A long silence followed on the radio. Then Falcon Lead replied in a tone filled with respect. Ma'am, it's an honor to fly beside you. She didn't respond to the compliment. She simply said, stay with us until landing. Always, Falcon Lead answered. The aircraft dipped into a layer of clouds. White mist washed over the windows. The cabin lights dimmed, and people clutched their armrests as the plane shuddered lightly. But the woman's hands remained calm. She leaned slightly forward, feeling the subtle push of wind on the nose. Crosswind picking up, she said. Correcting. Now. Her corrections were so smooth that the first officer barely felt them. You're incredible, he whispered without thinking. She shook her head. I'm just doing what's needed. The cloud layer thinned, revealing patches of land below, dark shapes, faint lights, and long stretches of flat terrain where the emergency field awaited their arrival. The first officer looked out the window. We're getting close, she nodded. I see it. There was something in her eyes now, something gentle, almost sad. Returning to the sky was like opening a book she had closed long ago. Every page carried memories she wasn't sure she wanted to read again. Falcon Lead gave another update. Runway is illuminated. Fire crew on standby. Wind shifting 2 degrees. Copy, she said. Her tone remained calm, but inside she felt the pull of old instincts meeting old fears. She steadied her breath, grounding herself in the present. The first officer watched every detail of her posture. It was the stance of someone who had once carried enormous responsibility. Someone shaped by thousands of decisions that had to be right. Someone who had lived with consequences most people never imagined. He finally said something soft, almost to himself. I don't think you ran from the sky. I think the sky ran after you, and today it caught you. Her hands paused. For half a second, the smallest crack in her armor. Then she smiled a small, tired smile. Maybe, she said quietly, but right now the sky needs us to land. She began configuring the aircraft for final descent. The flaps lowered. The engines adjusted. The runway lights grew brighter. In the distance, Falcon Lead gave one last call. Viper, we'll hold formation until touchdown. You're clear. The woman nodded, steady and focused. Let's bring them home, she whispered. In the aircraft, as if hearing her, followed her guidance with absolute trust. Asterisk, asterisk, the runway lights stretched out below them like a long path made only for this moment. The woman held the controls with a calm, steady grip, guiding the aircraft through the final descent. The engines hummed deeply, the wind pressed against the fuselage, and the cabin behind her grew silent as passengers sensed the landing had begun. The first officer watched her carefully. Every small adjustment she made was deliberate, almost gentle. She flew the heavy aircraft with the same ease someone might guide a pencil across paper. He felt himself relax for the first time since the emergency began. If anyone could bring them home, it was her. "Approach is stable," he said softly. "Hold the checklist," she replied. He read the necessary items aloud, and she confirmed each one with a calm nod. The sky around them glowed faintly from the lights below, and the two F-22s stayed on their flanks like silent guardians, matching every move that Falcon lead radioed in. "Viper, you are clear for final. Wind steady. We'll break away once you touch down." "Thank you," she answered. Her tone warm but still focused, but inside her, something shifted. She had not spoken to military pilots in over a decade. She had not touched flight controls in years. Yet here she was guiding hundreds of lives through the sky as if no time had passed. The first officer glanced at her again. "You ready?" She didn't smile, but her eyes softened, always. At 300 feet, light turbulence brushed the aircraft. A few passengers gasped. The woman felt the movement before it fully formed and corrected it smoothly, her hands steady, as if they belonged to someone who had never left the sky. The runway rose toward them. 200. The first officer called. The landing gear locked into place with a thump. 100. The wind shifted slightly, but she compensated. Without trouble. 50. The engines roared softly as she reduced power with perfect timing. 30. The aircraft floated, almost weightless for a heartbeat. 10. Then the wheels touched the ground soft, controlled, precise. A landing so smooth passengers later said they barely felt it. The aircraft rolled down the runway, slowing under her gentle control. Falcon Lead's voice came through one last time. "Welcome home, Viper." She didn't respond immediately. She guided the aircraft to a stop, right where emergency crews waited. When the brakes settled and the engine spooled down, she finally breathed out a long, quiet breath, one she had held for 12 years. Applause erupted in the cabin. People cried, hugged, whispered prayers of relief. But none of them knew why the landing felt so perfect, or why the sky outside now held fighter jets breaking off in graceful arcs. Only the first officer knew the truth. He turned to her, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved all of us." She shook her head. "We saved them together, not like you did," he insisted. "They were calling you Viper. I've heard stories. But I never thought I'd meet you." She took off her headset slowly, as if lifting a weight she had worn too long. "I didn't come here to be found. I just came to fly as a passenger." "But the sky remembered you," he said softly. She paused at that. Something honest, something deep hit her chest. She had spent years hiding from the past, telling herself she had left everything behind. But this moment, the aircraft, the landing, the escort, the voices calling her old call sign made her realize something she never admitted out loud. The sky never forgets those who once flew with their whole heart. The cockpit door opened, and the head attendant peeked inside. Her face was wet with tears she tried to hide. "Is everything okay up here?" The first officer nodded. Thanks to her, dozens of passengers were already standing, looking toward the front, trying to see the woman who had guided them to safety. The flight attendant stepped aside slightly. "They want to thank whoever helped." The woman shook her head gently. "No attention. Let the first officer have it. He's the one they saw earlier. Attention isn't something I want." The attendant understood but still whispered, "You saved lives today. That matters." The woman didn't answer. She looked out at the faint glow of the runway lights, the night sky quiet and calm above them. After a moment, she stood and helped check the captain again. The medical team rushed inside. They thanked her without knowing her name. She only nodded and stepped back. The first officer watched her gather her small gray backpack, the same one she arrived with. "Will I ever see you again?" he asked. She gave him a calm, almost bittersweet smile. "The sky is wide, but perhaps." As she walked down the aisle, Passengers stared with gratitude without understanding. Some whispered blessings. Some simply stepped aside, sensing something extraordinary in her presence. She reached the exit, paused for a brief moment, and looked once at the quiet night outside. It no longer felt like a place she had run away from. It felt like a place that had waited for her. And as she stepped onto the stairway, a final message came through her headset, quiet, almost private. "Viper," Falcon Lead said. "Anytime you return to the sky, you won't be alone." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. She simply walked into the night, no longer hiding, no longer running, carrying the sky inside her once again.